Good evening and welcome to this online debate on conspiracy theories. It's the third and final debate of our series between truth and trust in the context of the House of European History's Fake for Real temporary exhibition. Thank you for being with us, and special thanks to our four guest speakers. Conspiracies have been around probably since humans stood upright. So have conspiracy theories. What's the difference? Some might ask. Well, simply put, conspiracies are facts. Conspiracy theories, an amalgam of outright lies, half-truths, and fabrications. COVID vaccines will alter our DNA. COVID vaccines will implant microchips into people. A volunteer in the Oxford COVID-19 vaccine trial died. All three are claims made during the current pandemic that spread like wildfire. All three are conspiracy theories that have been discredited. Yet they're still around and millions still believe them to be true. Why? The speed with which such theories spread make them almost impossible to debunk. And Winston Churchill once remarked, "A lie gets halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to get its pants on." Perhaps even more important than speed is the fact that conspiracy theories are matters of belief, of faith, not of evidence. People seem to want to believe that there is something fishy. Someone or a group of others must surely be pulling the strings to cause misfortune deliberately. One of the case studies we have at the House of European History, and which we will hear about this evening, it's in our Fake for Real temporary exhibition, probably proves this point best. This case study explores the long-lasting power of one of the most famous and of the most dreadful conspiracy theories ever written. I'm referring to the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a fabricated, plagiarized anti-Semitic text describing a fake Jewish plan for global domination. Originating in Russia in the early years of the 20th century, the text had appeared in England, Finland, Germany, Poland, and the United States already by the end of the 1920s. The protocols began featuring in Nazi propaganda soon after the publication of the first German edition. And this even though high-ranking Nazi officials like Joseph Goebbels considered them fake also as early as 1924. He did, however, believe in the text's inner truth, as he called it. It is impossible to know the exact contribution of this text to the persecution of Jews around Europe at the time. However, the protocols demonstrate clearly how dangerous conspiracy theories can be. They can have, and in this particular case, they did have deadly consequences. By the way, despite being debunked, the pamphlet is still being published. It's read and it's believed around the world. Dear speakers, dear participants, tonight we will try to further explore with our experts what lies behind the thinking of conspiracy theories and what more we can do to counter it. I would like to thank you once again for being here, and I wish you a very fruitful debate.
Thank you, Constanze, and welcome everyone to this, our third and final episode in this series. My name is Paul Salmons. I'm delighted to be moderating this debate again, and I would just like to begin with a few short remarks. Firstly, that conspiracies do exist, of course. They are real. There are times when people conspire together for their own benefit and do others great harm. We might think of Watergate here, or the Al-Qaeda attacks on the United States in September 2001. Conspiracy theorists, however, are fantasists. They see plots and cabals behind all manner of events and developments where none exist. They spread unfounded stories based on fictions, on lies, fantasies that fabricate the existence of secretive groups plotting to control governments, markets, and world events. Conspiracy theories, I want to suggest, are harmful in several ways. Firstly, they invite hatred of and even violence against those who are said to be behind the conspiracy at hand. They do harm, though, also to the conspiracy theory believer. They prevent those who believe in these fantasies from really living authentically in the world and understanding the world that we live in. Thirdly, they spread disinformation and distrust. They have a pernicious effect, eroding faith in the institutions of knowledge and authoritative sources of information that we do have at hand. So, real-world conspiracies and conspiracy myths exist simultaneously. Our challenge, of course, is how can we know the difference? In today's discussion, as in others explored in this series, Between Truth and Trust, we examine how we know what we know, why people believe things that are not true and that are evidently not true, and how we can build resilience to false information in what has been called a post-truth world. The issue, I believe, is vital and urgent. If we cannot agree even on what is true in the world, shared understanding, compromise, working together to find solutions to our common problems becomes so much more difficult. So I'm delighted to welcome our panel of experts who will help us investigate these issues further. And to begin with, I'll turn please to Elise Wang, Assistant Professor of English Comparative Literature and Linguistics at California State University, to open this discussion with a definition of conspiracy theories, a historical overview of the phenomenon, and to address the issue of why some conspiracy theories just won't die. Those of you that are tuning in, please do use the chat function to put your questions and issues and comments to Elise and the rest of the panel, and we'll try to include as many of those as we can throughout the session. First of all, Elise, thank you so much for being with us, and delighted to hear from you first. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Just to add to what you said just now about conspiracy theories being harmful to the sufferer, Richard Hofstadter put it really well. He said the theorist is a double sufferer. He suffers from the world and from his fantasies. So I study conspiracy narratives. My training is in literature, so I'm interested in the stories themselves, their structure, their logic, what kind of thinking they set in motion. I'm also a medievalist, so I look at the long history of these stories, which we see repeated over and over again to the present. I'm going to start us off with an example of one genre of conspiracy theory, one lineage, to demonstrate some things that become clear about conspiracy theories from this angle. So let's get started. On the 22nd of March, 1144, a forester found the body of a 12-year-old boy, William, near Norwich in England, seemingly the victim of a homicide. The body is identified by the parents and buried. They mourn. Then rumors begin to circulate that the small and relatively new Jewish community, actually they had only lived there for 9 years, had been involved somehow. The sheriff, actually seeing no evidence of this, steps up to protect the community, and that seems to be the end of it. But about 5 years later, when talk of the incident has already begun to fade, a monk named Thomas shows up, and he's got a story ready to go. He says that every year at Passover, which this was, a secret Jewish cabal chooses a different country, a different county of England in which to mock the crucifixion. And this year the lot had fallen to Norwich. So he goes around seeking details of the murder that would mirror the crucifixion of Christ, a crown of thorns, holes through his hands from nails. But the people he tries to interview in Norwich seem kind of unhelpful. They don't tell him what he wants to hear. So he even comments in frustration that they don't seem to remember the incident very well. This is frustrating to him because the thing is, he really, really wants to set up his own local devotional cult with William as the martyr. So William has to be a martyr. And undaunted by this lack of information, he writes The Life and Miracles of St. William of Norwich anyway, and he gets his cult. It is suppressed, but it lays the outline for a powerful conspiracy story that has persisted to this day, a sort of the beginning of a lineage. commonly called blood libel, the story that Jewish people sacrifice Christian children to use their blood for religious rituals, often during Passover. And as Thomas's story gets around, so he publishes it and it gets around, people suddenly begin to repeat it for any missing children. And there are a lot of missing children during the medieval period. There's not very much supervision, many drown. And this story gets repeated in Gloucester, in Bury, in Lincoln. You might have heard of Little Hugh of Lincoln, and also quickly on the continent in Obervesel and Fulda, and most famously Trent, Simon of Trent. And this time the Jewish communities do not fare so well. Each of these stories is followed swiftly by the mass arrest, torture, and execution of the Jewish communities in these places, over 150 documented times in the medieval period, and that's just documented. And in addition, this culminates in the total expulsion of the Jews from England and pogroms elsewhere. This exact story, with whatever sort of local characteristics are necessary, has resurfaced wherever anti-Semitism and far-right sentiments are on the rise. It becomes sort of a handmaid to that sentiment. You'll hear shortly about the protocols of the Elders of Zion, but there are far more recent examples as well. In 2007, an Italian group attempted to revive the cult of Simon of Trent. In 2015, a white supremacist group did the same for Hugh of Lincoln. In 2019, a gunman entered a synagogue in San Diego at Passover, opening fire and accusing the congregation of ritual murder. And of course, the primary narrative of QAnon, the sprawling conspiracy theory that has now spread internationally, is that the elites are kidnapping, torturing, and drinking the blood of children, white Christian children. And this is just the trajectory of one conspiracy narrative. I could trace others, but even in a single example, some essential elements of conspiracy theories become clear. The first is about the story itself, so the narrative. It has a firm ending that William was a martyr, but is a little vague on the details. So Thomas's story is driven by the outcome he wants, that William was martyred by the Jews, remember, because he wants his cult. But it's not very clear on the details. He can't really get the details that he wants. So he ends up saying, well, maybe he was crucified, but also maybe his blood was drained or his blood was drained. Maybe he was partially eaten. We see this clear on the ending, fuzzy on the details form in almost every conspiracy theory. People are really sure that we didn't go to the moon, but are not so sure what we did or how to explain the rest of the evidence for that. And this is an essential part of the form. It builds the ability to adapt into the narrative structure. So for example, if you say, as people did at the time, actually William wasn't found with a crown of thorns, a believer might reply, oh, well then they used his blood to make matzah. Because the details are not important. The important part is the conclusion that William was martyred by the Jews. And the details can sort of align to take us there. This is what makes conspiracy theories so hard to kill, by the way, is that the facts are not the point. The end is the point. And another thing about the narrative that we can see from Thomas's story is that it uses evidence as style. And what I mean by that is that conspiracy theories steal forms from legitimate sciences and institutions in order to give their stories a ring of truth, the style of truth, to sound true. In this case, Thomas has appropriated the form of a saint's legendary, which was a document meant to offer proof and argument for canonization, for sainthood, for his conspiracy theory. So he's taken what is a sort of institutional form and used it for his conspiracy theory to give his conspiracy theory the sound of truth. Again, we see this in conspiracy theories to the present. No one loves physics proofs and physics jargons more than the Flat Earth Society. Second, this example tells us something about believers and how they come to the story. So you'll remember that initially there's a little suspicion of the Jewish community, but that dies out pretty quickly. But this conspiracy theory is a narrative that explains suffering, the loss of a child. And nothing is more powerful, especially in moments of mourning. Conveniently, it's also a narrative that justifies existing hatred and bias. It says, you were right to feel that. You were right to suspect them. So it offers both a community around the loss, around the suffering, and actions to take, revenge. And the firm ending fuzzy details form that I talked about is custom built for radicalization to action, because you don't have to be slowed down by the facts to get where you're going. And I think this can also help us see that believers are not victims of misinformation. They haven't been accidentally misled into this, even if they receive the misinformation and begin to believe it. They want this story. It's a good story for the situation, and some want the violence that results from it. We can see also in these cases that believers are not fringe or disenfranchised people. They're mostly people actually at the center of the community. They are people in power. They're the people who initiate these pogroms. And finally, the story can show us that conspiracy theories, those that take root and become powerful like this, are always companions to a political or social agenda. So you'll recall that Thomas comes to town in order to build his cult. That's where the story comes from, not from William's death. William is a convenient pawn for him, but that's not where the story comes from. We see this again and again, especially around existing sectarian tensions. A conspiracy theory will come and explain your troubles by justifying an existing hatred and thereby rally you to a particular action. And as such, the agenda is almost always by a powerful group against a less powerful. And there's a through line from agenda to conspiracy theory to violence. So looking at conspiracy theories as stories that recur and share some essential mechanisms, I think helps us understand the way they work in the present. For one thing, it helps us demystify some of the more bizarre theories like QAnon, that it is blood libel, just sort of repackaged, by putting them in a long context of similar stories. And I think also our distance from things like William of Norwich or Simon of Trent, these cases can help us see things like the through line from theory to violence that are harder to see when we don't have distance from them. All right, thank you, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much for starting us off, Elise. That's a great opening, and just a couple of questions, if I may. Do you, from taking that long view and that historical perspective, do you identify certain periods in the past and certain places where conspiracy theories really take hold? Are there social, political, economic factors at play when these get greater traction, and how would you speak about that?
Yes, I think there definitely are. I think there can be many factors, but some of the interesting ones that I've noticed are that actually conspiracy theories like blood libel that target a disenfranchised group tend to pop up and take hold when that disenfranchised group is actually gaining something, gaining a little bit of rights, gaining traction in some way. So the famous Mendel Baylis trial in the early part of the 20th century was another case of blood libel. But it gained international attention because it was a moment, it happened in Kiev, and it was a moment when the Russian Federation was thinking about lifting restrictions on Jewish residents. And allowing them to live wherever they wanted, because this would be good for the economy. So there was talk about that. And obviously there was strong conservative opposition to it. And this conspiracy theory gained so much traction, I think, because it was actually a moment in which things might change and in which this group might gain power. And I think in particular, conspiracy theories that prey on sectarian tensions really take hold in moments not of sort of great suffering for the sort of majority group, but of slight gains for the minority group.
one of our other panelists, Hugo Mercier, I believe also has a question for you. Hugo?
Hi, if there's time, thank you. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Elise. So the question is, given the success of blood libels, unfortunately, in Western culture, like how much do you think is due in a way to the specific invention? Like essentially, if Thomas hadn't invented them, do you think they would have been invented shortly after? And in particular, are they found in other cultures without any contact with the West? Is it like a pattern you find recurring across cultures, or is it more like a specific historical invention?
That's a really good question. I think there has been some evidence that Thomas didn't make this up whole cloth. He was working from other rumors and bits and pieces from things. He just happened to write. Sorry, my light went off. He just happened to write a popular account of it. So I think absolutely the story existed before, and someone would have written it down eventually. I do think there were consequences to his having written it down when he did, because it very quickly, it was shortly after the Norman conquest of England, and so there was a lot of interchange between England and the continent, and his writing made it to the continent much more quickly than perhaps someone else's would have. And already you see identical stories less than 100 years later. So it spreads very quickly in a way that I think is significant. And then to your question of whether we see it in other cultures, not really. It tends to be a Western and then Eastern European myth. And I think that is because it's predicated on a particular sectarian tension against Jews. It's predicated on anti-Semitism. And there's a way in which blood libel is really inextricable from that, even with QAnon, where they are trying to sort of map it on to a different structure, a sort of Republicans, Democrats structure. It ends up having all of these anti-Semitic overtones anyway. And so I think that's sort of essential to the story, which is why it hasn't been successful elsewhere.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So conspiracy theories energize many people and can be intriguing just in terms of flights of imagination, or thinking of things like the moon landings, idea that this was fate somehow, maybe one kind of category. But many conspiracy theories also lead to various forms of violence. They all somehow do violence to the truth, right? In the sense that they spread lies and misunderstanding, misinformation, disinformation. They do violence to communities very often by deepening divisions between different groups, generating suspicion and hostility, particularly often towards minorities. And then they also give rise at times, unfortunately, to physical violence, particularly when the solution to a particular problem becomes imagined as being getting rid of the group that's been accused of causing those problems. One prominent example of a conspiracy theory which has led to great violence and has been mentioned a couple of times already is that of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And I'd like to ask now Simina Badica to tell us how that House of European History has approached the example of the protocols in the museum exhibition that she's curated called Fake for Real. Simina, please.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you everyone for being here. I must say from the very beginning that I am the least specialist in this topic from everyone who is here. I was actually reading what my co-panelists are writing in order to document the exhibition that we opened in October last year. which is called Fake for Real, A History of Forgery and Falsification. And I will tell you a little bit about the exhibition, because this is the occasion why we are here, and how we integrated the conspiracy theories in this long history of fakes and forgeries, and the difficulties that posed, because of course to exhibit conspiracy theories in a museum is not really a very obvious and easy choice. I will also share some images with you, because if it's still a museum, so you will see a few of the views from our exhibition, and also some objects. So this is really the entry. And what we try to do in the exhibition is to do long history of fakes and forgeries throughout European history. Now, what we invite the visitor to discover is that actually each era faked what it valued most, that there are specific types of fake linked to specific eras. Like now, for example, in medieval times, you will find this phenomenon of forged relics, because religion, of course, was such an important thing in medieval times, such an important way of understanding the world, that you have a flourishing of this type of fakes. You will then find as visitors, because I hope that at some point you will still be able to see the exhibition. By the way, it's still open until January next year. You will also see, for example, fake travel accounts appearing in the era of the great geographical discoveries. So again, whatever becomes interesting or important for a certain historical era also becomes a preferred or predilect subject of fake. So this is one of the things that we kind of show to the visitors throughout the exhibition. What is also important to say is that for the fakes and forgeries that we show in the exhibition, most of them have quite a predictable biography. So there is a forger, there is a clever makeup, somebody at some point thinks of something really interesting, people get excited, the forgery leaves for some time, but then it is debunked. And then there is most of the time shame and oblivion that falls upon forger and forgery itself. So you can see this even with forgeries that lasted for centuries. And one example is the donation of Constantine, which some of you may know. It's the forged document that was the fundament of the power of the Catholic Church in Europe, the secular power of the Catholic Church. Yeah, so it was this very important, ultimately forged document called the donation of Constantine. So we have all these kinds of different examples and narratives of fake in the exhibition. And then we come up to modern times and to conspiracy theories. And what is particularly striking, and it was already mentioned, and I'm glad it was, is that conspiracy theories seem very resistant to debunking. Even more, they seem to flourish upon their debunking. They seem to incorporate and to thrive on whatever evidence is brought against them. They have a system, a way of incorporating this evidence that is brought against them. Now, the conspiracy theory that we chose to show in the exhibition, because for each section we really chose one example into which we can go deeper into explanations, is the conspiracy theory that is at the basis of iconography like this one, which may seem very understandable for some of us, but I must tell you that sometimes when I'm guiding, and unfortunately it doesn't happen so much nowadays, but it happened to me recently that I met a group of Spanish high school students. And then I usually start my tour in this section of the exhibition by saying, you probably have heard there is a Jewish conspiracy to take over the world. And then people usually react like, yeah, okay, I know what you are talking about. But these Spanish teenagers, they were like, no, what are you talking about? So That's my bit of good news for tonight. Apparently, it's not such a well-known fact anymore. So we explain to our visitors the history of this conspiracy theory, which is I would even say that we chose a very easy case because it's a conspiracy theory based on a forgery, which is itself a plagiarism. So it's, in a way, it's very easy to debunk. This is the one of the not the first, but one of the first editions of the book. So as Constanze Itzel was telling at the beginning, this is a pamphlet that was published in Tsarist Russia starting with 1903. It claims to be a leaked document from a very secret meeting of the Jewish leaders, which actually put in writing their plan to take over the world. So you have everything there. They would control the press, the finances, they would spread rumors, they would start revolution, destabilize states, and bring down empires, because we are still at the time of empire. So this is what the pamphlet was really this leaked document of this Jewish conspiracy to take over the world. Now, this circulated in Tsarist Russia up until the First World War and the Bolshevik Revolution. It had several editions, some of them in very prestigious church printing presses, printing houses, printing houses of Orthodox monasteries. But what happened was the Bolshevik Revolution and the white Russian emigration that left Russia and went to Europe, to Western Europe, and brought this book with them. And this is when actually the international story of this pamphlet begins. So this is when it starts to be translated in all European languages. Apparently, it was the most published book after the Bible in interwar Europe. But it's also the moment when it reaches Europe and it becomes more famous. It's also the moment when it is debunked as a forgery and plagiarism, because this is actually the book from which it was plagiarized. It is a book which was published in 1864 in Brussels by a French journalist and political refugee, which was named Maurice Joly. And it was basically a political pamphlet describing Napoleon III's dictatorial action. So it's very interesting to read, to put them side by side. In the initial book, there is no Jewish presence. So really, the Jews were added in making the forgery. It's a very clever thing. Now we show the story, the history. This is one I meant to show more interwar translations. This is the Romanian translation, but we had a lot of them in the exhibition. Now, what is also I think interesting to see this in an exhibition is that you kind of see the context around it, and sometimes there are even unintentional connections that are made, like right next to the conspiracy theory, we show the Dreyfus affair, which in a way of looking at it, it's also a conspiracy. So not a conspiracy theory, but it's a conspiracy. So what happened in the Dreyfus affair is that a conspiracy of the high echelons of the French army to hide their own bad practice in condemning Dreyfus was finally debunked. And it was shown to the world, and the fake documents that they used and they produced. But for a while, they really tried through conspiratory means to hide this. So when they realized what had happened in their own ranks, they tried to hide it for a while. Another story of fake and forgery that it's again very close to the conspiracy theories, also in time, because this is a section that we call uniting and dividing, and that actually deals with the fakes and forgeries that were meant to unite and divide at the time of creating nations in Europe, to put it very wide. And this other section that is very close to conspiracy theories is forging science. And maybe some of you might recognize this guy in the front of the image is the pill down man. Now this was a scientific forgery, so a fraudulent discovery that took 50 years to be uncovered inside the scientific profession. But what we insist on telling in this side of the exhibition is that being able to be proven false, so what in scientific knowledge is called to be falsifiable, it's a constitutive element of scientific knowledge. So anything in the scientific world that cannot be proven false is unscientific. So some of the things that maybe it's that it's not so widely understood is that science is not claiming to hold the ultimate truth. On the contrary, science is a way of knowing the world, which is open to mistake, which is open to improving, which is open to proving, to admitting it was wrong. The way you conceive of knowledge inside the scientific profession, and this is a very good example, the pill down man, that it was exactly the same institution that accepted the pill down man as real, that 50 years later, it was the British Museum, because there was new technology that could that could test the age of the bones. So they used new technology to actually prove that they were wrong, and then that this was a fraudulent research. I think the putting together the scientific, and I think what has been discussed so far about this mimicry of the scientific knowledge, and about how forgery always hides itself very nicely as close to the truth as possible. I think it's also something that we try to show in the exhibition. And just to end this, I would like to say that even though some of our viewers may not be able to come to Brussels until January, we do have also on this channel that you are watching now, we did create some video guided tours of the exhibition. So the curators of the exhibition, me and my colleague Ioana Urbanek, we are taking you on this video journey to see all these examples that I've very briefly talked to you about. So thank you for being here and looking forward to discussions.
Thank you, Simina, and it's great that you have those video possibilities online, able to at least virtually visit the exhibition. I hope people will do that. You spoke there, Simina, particularly on that issue of how difficult it is to debunk conspiracy theories through the kind of force of evidence, and the ways in which people perhaps double down in the face of overwhelming evidence very often that these conspiracy theories are false. So presumably they fulfill a different kind of need, a deep need. You know, if people are prepared to hold on to ideas where evidence overwhelmingly shows those beliefs to be false, what do you think? Do you have any reflections on what other deep needs these fantasies are fulfilling for many people?
I wouldn't want to suppose to invent some research that I have not conducted myself, and I think the future speakers will actually be very much more able to talk about this. But it's just a very current reflection that I'm doing from myself on this issue. I come from Romania, which is one of the countries that have the lowest rate of vaccination, of COVID vaccination in Europe at the moment. It's in European Union, actually. So it's only Bulgaria that has lowest. We are at about 30%. And of course, you could say that it's a haven for conspiracy theories of and anti-vaxxers. But I guess if you would really ask me to explain what's going on, it's more about a very deep distrust in the state and in the health system, which is two systems that have constantly failed Romanian people over the last, at least 20 years. Let's only talk about post-communism, but even before. So it's, yes, as you say, you have to look at multiple things, and you have to look at what does it serve? Why is it easier to believe in this and the wider context? But
thank you. I think that's a really important point, that maybe when we explore the conspiracy theories and tend to the position of simply refuting or trying to debunk them, maybe we sometimes miss something else which is important, which that real world problems and issues and challenges that we should take seriously somehow underlie some of these beliefs and fantasies. So as we move on, one of the things I'd like us to explore further also is, you picked up on it again, Simina, when you compared the protocols to the real world conspiracy of the Dreyfus affair and the way in which Dreyfus was framed, and there was a covering up, and which thankfully eventually was exposed. But it returns us again to this notion that there are conspiracies, that people do work together sometimes for malicious ends. There are plots, there are cover-ups, and then there are, as you say, with the protocols, those complete flights of fantasy. So it still remains for us then to kind of unpick this, right? And what are then the traits of conspiratorial thinking, and how can we tell the real world conspiracy from the fantasies of the conspiracy myths and the conspiracy theorists? So we're very fortunate to have with us Stephan Lewandowsky, Professor of Cognitive Science from the University of Bristol. And Stephan, I'd like you to invite you, please, to shed some light on these difficult issues.
Thank you. I believe you can now see my slides. Yes, I want to address some of those very interesting questions that have already been raised, and I want to do it within the context of the pandemic. And one of the reasons for that is that conspiracy theories have been a companion of pandemics for centuries. The Black Death in the 14th century triggered anti-Semitic hysteria. We've already heard a lot about anti-Semitism tonight. Pandemics are one of the triggers, or have been in the past, for additional anti-Semitism. In Russia in 1892, there's a record of crowds chasing down anybody in a white coat because they were held responsible for the cholera pandemic at the time. Now, if you think that was a long time ago and far away, and somehow we're living in more enlightened times, then let me remind you that not too long ago in Holland, Dutch rioters attacked a COVID-19 test station in hospitals, and in fact, attacks on medical personnel based on conspiracy theories have unfortunately become fairly common in the United States and even in the United Kingdom and elsewhere. And specifically in the United Kingdom, we have survey data suggesting that up to 10% of the British population think that COVID is a Chinese bioweapon. For example, they also believe in other conspiracy theories relating to COVID. Now, the reason this happens is because whenever people feel scared, or whenever they're feeling that they've suffered a loss of control over their lives, then a certain number of people will resort to conspiracy theories because being able to blame somebody offers a degree of psychological comfort. If you can blame Bill Gates for COVID, for some people that is easier and more comforting than to accept that it was a random transmission of a virus from one animal species to human beings. Now, I want to focus a bit more on what the consequences are of conspiracy theories, again, in the context of the pandemic. Now, there's ample data out there now suggesting that there's an association between people believing in these conspiracy theories and a reduced willingness to participate in controlling the pandemic, either through wearing masks, taking tests, or getting vaccinated. In fact, there is a very strong association generally between endorsement of conspiracy theories and rejection of vaccinations generally, not just COVID, but generally. And it has been mentioned before, I think it was Elise who said that, or it was Paul who said that conspiracy theories can give rise to violence. Yes, indeed. And in the United Kingdom last year, you may remember that this conspiracy theory that 5G broadband causes COVID, complete nonsense, of course, but that theory triggered a fair amount of violence against people as well as telecommunications installations in the United Kingdom. So conspiracy theories are not without adverse consequences on society, as we have already heard tonight. And there's now plenty of data to suggest that is the case. Well, but here's the problem. Real conspiracies also exist. This is just a very small sample here of, famous conspiracies from history. In the 1970s, we had Watergate. That was a classic conspiracy, and yet it happened. In the 1980s, we had Iran-Contra. We had Oliver North selling weapons from the basement of the White House, conspiring to break American law in the process. Classic conspiracy. It happened. And more recently, we've had the Volkswagen diesel scandal, the major car manufacturer conspiring to, fake emissions tests for their cars. And again, classic conspiracy with a cover-up, with collusion, all the things about, what we know about conspiracies. So how can we tell real conspiracies apart from what we sort of call conspiracy theories, which we have strong reason to believe are false or invented? Well, that's not an easy problem to solve. In my view, the way I like to approach this issue is by focusing on the cognition, that is the thinking and the rhetoric that is exhibited by people who uncover real conspiracies and those who are what we call conspiracy theorists. Now, one of the interesting things about real conspiracies is that throughout history, to the best of my knowledge, all the ones I've looked at have been uncovered by journalists, engineers, whistleblowers, politicians, very, very mainstream people who use conventional cognition as their tools. They sift through evidence, they rely on testimony, they publish their findings, their investigations, and all of a sudden we understand there's a conspiracy going on. Now, in contrast to that, conspiracy theories, people who push conspiracy theories, are engaging in cognition that does not meet standards of scientific discovery or indeed logic. And there are 7 aspects to this, at least, which are summarized here. The acronym for this happens to be conspire or conspire. And I don't have time to go through the whole lot, but I do want to pick out a few of these because they've already come up in the previous discussion. So the I in conspire is immune to evidence. Conspiracy theories are indeed immune to evidence, as Elise has pointed out. And what is intriguing about that particular form of immunity is that conspiracy theorists will take some piece of evidence on board and they will then adapt the theory in what we call a self-sealing manner to sustain the theory in light of contrary evidence. So they adapt, but they do not abandon the theory, which is one of the crucial differences to other endeavors such as science. And also, we've all seen this, that conspiracy theories rely very much on reinterpreting randomness as meaningful patterns. And in fact, we can show that in the laboratory. If you induce a feeling of lack of control in people, then they begin to see patterns in random dots where there are no patterns. It is that loss of control, again, that makes people see patterns where there are none. And the final thing, as I said, I don't have time to go through them all, but the final aspect of conspiracy theories that I like a great deal because it is so clearly different from conventional condition is their incoherence or the contradictory nature of the cognition. So it's not unusual for people to simultaneously believe that COVID is a hoax. In other words, it's not a disease, it doesn't exist, but also that it is a Chinese bioweapon. Well, it can't be both, right? As it happens, it's neither, but you know, it couldn't possibly be both, because if it's real, then it can't be a hoax. If it's a hoax, it can't be a weapon, you know. And that contradictory thinking is a classic aspect of conspiracy theories. And QAnon came up earlier. If you look at the belief system that QAnon adherents articulate, you will find that it is just a hodgepodge of mutually contradictory beliefs that do not form a coherent story. Now, that isn't the point of conspiracy theories. The point of conspiracy theories is not to be coherent. The point of it is to undermine or counter an official account based on the suspicion that, as both of you, Simina and Elise, have said, the lack of trust that underlies people who believe in these theories. So that's a brief thumbnail sketch of conspiratorial cognition. What can we do? Well, debunking conspiracy theories is notoriously difficult for the reasons I've mentioned, because people will adapt the theory if you falsify an aspect of it, but they're not going to give it up unless you have to work pretty hard for somebody to let go of a conspiracy theory. What is much easier, though, is to use something called inoculation. What's inoculation? Well, inoculation is a cognitive vaccine, basically. What you do is you tell people ahead of time that they may be misled by a conspiracy theory or some other form of misinformation, and you then give them the skills to refute an anticipated argument by disinformers. And if you teach people ahead of time how they can be misled, then it turns out they can become more resilient. Now, to do this, you need to know how people might be misinformed. You need to know that ahead of time. But you don't have to know exactly what it is that people will be exposed to, which is nice, because the talking points of conspiracy theories change, but the cognition underlying conspiracy does not. And so, for example, we've done this team, Sander van der Linden, John Rosenbeek, and myself, we've conducted a series of experiments recently where we present very brief videos, 2 minutes, videos that teach people how to detect when they're being misled. And one of the techniques we teach them to detect is that incoherence that is so characteristic of conspiracy theories. And what we find is that after 2 minutes, in comparison to a control condition that is not given training, inoculated participants are better able to identify incoherent argumentation and are then less willing to share that information online, and they also believe it less. So through inoculation, I would argue that we can give people the tools to become a bit more resistant to falling for conspiracy theories. And if you're interested in more detail on that, John Cook and I published a little handbook on conspiracy theories, how to detect them and how to debunk them, or how to inoculate people, about a year ago, just before, or 18 months, just before the pandemic started. That's available in a whole bunch of languages, and I'll refer you to that link if you're interested to delve into this more. And I think my time is up. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will stop sharing now, and I'm happy to take questions, of course.
Thank you so much, Stephan. So may I just ask an opening question? The examples that we've seen of real-world conspiracies, it seems to me, tend to have a certain strong focus on a particular end and a particular goal, which might only involve a relatively small number of people in on the secret and a rather tight group that would be purposed with acting it out. Many conspiracy theories tend to be vast, global in their nature. It seems to almost rest upon a belief that people are so extraordinarily good at their jobs, so skillful and dedicated. Not only are they able to carry out such grandiose schemes, but they're all very good at kind of keeping that secret so tight as well. Is there something in that? Is there a difference?
Absolutely, and this is another attribute of conspiracy theories, that there are two things at once. They're always vast and involve, the world government or Jews or, these huge groups of people that are all collaborating and they all get along so well that they can pull this off. But at the same time, most conspiracy theories are also very particular about 2 or 3 people who are actually doing it. COVID is a huge conspiracy, but it's Bill Gates and Anthony Fauci. So there are this tiny number of named individuals, on the one hand, accompanied by this vast body of other people that are all present and all powerful, and they know everything, they can handle this. So you're absolutely right. It's both this invocation of an invisible, powerful structure combined with only talking about 1 or 2 people that instantiate the conspiracy. So absolutely, that's another aspect of it. And in fact, it's one of the ways in which you can, show how implausible conspiracy theories are, because how on earth are you going to get all the climate scientists in the world, all the geophysicists around the world, all tens of thousands of them? How are you going to get them to all agree to pull off this hoax called climate change? They can't even agree on where to go for dinner. I've been there firsthand trying to get climate scientists to agree on just dinner, and it just doesn't happen. So it is that is one of the sort of ways in which you can educate people. Hang on, there's something funny going on there. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Not only the current climate scientists, but every new generation of them also, right? Every new person who goes to university, begins their doctoral studies, they all at some point have to buy into this myth if it's going to be sustained. Elise, I know you had a question for Stephan as well.
Yeah, I was really interested in the characteristics that you laid out about conspiracy theory thinking. And I know that some sociological surveys, and I think they're just surveys, have shown that believers in conspiracy theories tend to believe multiple conspiracy theories. You don't sort of get, you don't just buy in on one, you buy in on all of them, basically. Have you looked at the way that works at all? I guess what occurs to me is it could either be that there are just people predisposed to that type of thinking and so they buy in wholesale, or that there is an effect on their cognition of believing in one, and that becomes sort of a gateway to others because then you're used to that kind of thinking.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, you're absolutely right. They tend to cluster together. And one of the most amusing, in a weird way, amusing observations recently has been that a lot of the same people who are denying climate change are also now getting very exercised about COVID and denying that masks exist or that they help. And, you know, they're also anti-COVID vaccinations and they all think it's a bioweapon. And it's very surprising to see that at first glance, because you think, you know, what do the two things have to do with each other? But then, of course, yes, there is that underlying propensity to engage, to accept conspiracy theories of any type because they have the common attribute of opposing or undercutting an official account. And somebody who is severely distrustful of governments, health organizations, scientists, you know, of course they will believe in multiple conspiracy theories, because if they're distrusting of everything, well, then they have to believe any conspiracy that opposes whatever it is they're distrusting. And so, yeah, there is, on the one hand, a stable personality attribute that makes people more predisposed to conspiracy theories, and we have a fair understanding of what they are. Distrust is you know, a major factor, but also feelings of being, you know, left out or left behind or excluded from society. Also, other cognitive styles such as relying on intuition as a tool to understand the world. People who say, oh, I can feel it in my gut if something is true. Well, they're more likely to believe in conspiracy theories than people who say, well, I'd like to see evidence. So there's a whole bunch of factors that have been identified that predict or that are associated with conspiratorial thought. But that's not true for everybody. And I think that's important to understand. There are also quite a few people who will engage in conspiratorial rhetoric because it is convenient. If I want to fly to Bali on my next holiday without feeling guilty about the carbon emissions, I can just say climate change is a hoax, okay? And then I feel better. Or if I worry about getting sick from COVID and I can't handle that frightening emotion, then I can just say it's a hoax. And I feel better. I can regulate my emotion that way. And so quite a few people will engage in this rhetoric because it fulfills, you know, a psychological need. And those people are, in fact, seemingly much easier to talk to, because they will then, if you make them reflect, they will say, yeah, you know, yes, there's probably something to it. Otherwise, the climate scientists wouldn't all make this up. So we have to differentiate between these two clusters of people. Those who use it, conspiracy theory, as a tool of convenience, and others to whom it is really part of their identity and who are committed to it. And they're much harder to deal with.
Thank you. Hugo, I know you also had a question for Stephan.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Thanks, Stephan. I'm just like to push back a little bit on this one slide you had that was titled "Consequences of Conspiracy Theories," where the evidence was essentially correlational, and I think the evidence that I've seen suggests that. So in you know, you are presenting that as showing that even though you are careful in the wording, but the title was "Consequences," that beliefs in specific conspiracy theories is associated with kind of deeper and potentially kind of broader or more problematic attitudes towards, the health system or health behaviors and that sort of things. And the only study that I've seen that really tries to look at causality through some kind of longitudinal design, it was in the case of the rumors according to which Barack Obama was Muslim. And that study showed that, and surprisingly, people who did not like Obama were much more inclined to believe that that fake news, as we might call it now, but that believing that Obama was a Muslim had no effect on their attitudes towards him. And I think that's the case in many of these situations in which the conspiracy theory is really kind of the cherry on the cake. And it's, as you are saying, it's used to justify a mistrust of government or, other behavior. Like you don't want to wear a mask, and it's because masks are evil and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're disagreeing. So I never said it was causal. I mean, it is just.
The slide is called consequences.
Well, consequences in terms of the statistical association. Yes, maybe the word consequences. You think that applies too much causality. I don't think of it as a causal term. It is certainly an association. Now, it is totally possible that people who distrust the health system so much that they would never get vaccinated anyhow, but they're the ones who are articulating COVID conspiracy theories rather than that the articulation causes them. That absolutely, I think that is totally the case. Although when it comes to violence, I can't make a strong claim, but it is quite remarkable to me. I think that anybody who attacks doctors actually physically or burns down mobile phone towers, I'm not sure that these people have that propensity to begin with, and then attach a conspiracy to it. I think there it might be far more plausible to say, well, it might go the other way around. I mean, why on earth would somebody be predisposed to burn down a 5G tower if it weren't for the fact that somebody tells them it's causing COVID? And
So I take your point. I think there's a stronger claim to be made there. The counter argument, very briefly, would be that the specific form that the violence takes is clearly related to the content of the theory, but yes, the thing that someone wants to engage in violence towards authorities might be linked to kind of these deeper underlying factors.
Totally. I think, as I said, I don't think we disagree. I would totally agree with that. Yes. I mean, that same person could have also, started killing rabbits if somebody had told them that rabbits are responsible for, or pigeons or something. Yes, I think that's quite right.
Thank you. Elise, I can see you want to come in here also.
Yeah, but I also don't want to slow us down because I want to have enough time
we have time for a short comment.
Okay. I'm not a social scientist, so this is not generally how I look at things, but I do know that if we look at sort of COVID conspiracy theories in particular, that it was a Chinese hoax in some way, or a bioweapon, something like that. I think the rising anti-Asian violence is an interesting example because, was there I live in California, so there's a great rise, and I personally hadn't experienced racist abuse like that since, schoolyard bullies. So it had been, maybe these people were anti-Asian all along. And so secretly in their minds, they had anti-Asian racism. But they were emboldened by this rhetoric to, I think, be violent in a way that they wouldn't otherwise have been. And sort of from the perspective of the target, yes, I guess secret racism is not that different from overt racism, but for the target, it is, obviously. It has an effect.
Yes, absolutely. And I think you're right. And of course, and actually there, I would argue that there is pretty good evidence out there to suggest that condoning or allowing racist language to take hold in the society will cause further, violence and aggression. And that's, I'm saying causing based on studies that arguably have established causality. very different from what I reported, which were associations. Well, you can actually show that that is caused by that. For example, in Germany, if there are random Facebook outages because the internet provider falls over or Facebook goes down in a town, which apparently happens surprisingly often. I didn't know this. And you then look at what happens in these specific towns that are Facebook free for some period of time. Well, racist attacks against refugees go down because Facebook is no longer available to trigger those attacks. That was shown in a recent paper, and there's a number of papers now that, to my mind, have been very clever at establishing causality in similar circumstances. Certainly when it comes to ethnic hate crimes. The same is true in Russia. Their social network, the VKontakte, I don't know how to pronounce that. You can show that when that was being introduced into communities, that triggered ethnic violence. The mere presence of that social media platform, because it allowed people to hook up online and to articulate racism with impunity. And the moment you have that, that spills over into attacks. So, you know, there are cases where we can establish causality. It's just, as Hugo pointed out correctly, I didn't present those data. I just talked about associations.
Thank you. So, given that we appear to be living in a time of ever more proliferation of conspiracy theories in recent years, perhaps driven partly by the access to them through social media and internet fora, I'd like to return to that question again of well, why and under what circumstances do conspiracy theories become so popular? What kind of functions do they fulfill? What kinds of needs do they seem to address? And so this issue of how and why do people believe in conspiracy theories? Hugo Mercier is evolutionary and cognitive psychologist at the National Centre for Scientific Research in France. And as our fourth and final speaker on tonight's panel, I'd like to invite you please to address that very difficult question. Thank you, Hugo.
Thank you, Paul. So the first question I want to briefly talk about really is how do people believe in conspiracy theories? Because I think that when we think of conspiracy theorists, the most common type we have in mind are the people who we were talking about, the people who burned the 5G towers, the people who are the most extreme. And I don't think they're very representative. So kind of my favorite example is that of Pizzagate. So Pizzagate, as many of you will recall, is that conspiracy theory according to which high-level Democrats were abducting and abusing children in the basement of a pizzeria in the suburbs of DC. And this became famous in large part because there's a man called Edgar Madison Welsh who decided to take his vehicle and his machine gun and to storm the pizzeria and to demand that the children be freed. And there are no children. There's not even a basement to hide the children in. And he is now in jail. Actually, he might have gotten out recently, but he spent a number of years in jail. And that is what we have in mind. And obviously, we can all agree this is not great. But to his credit, to some extent, at least he was consistent. Because if you believe that children are being horribly abused somewhere and that the police is too corrupt to do anything about it, then trying to free the children is actually the right thing to do. It is the kind of the moral, the rational thing to do. And so possibly for that one individual, he had what we would call technically like an intuitive belief that the conspiracy theory was correct, in the sense that he believed in it in the same way as we would believe in it if we had seen the children being abused, if we had felt, this kind of this horrible emotion and this urge to do something about it. But he's one person. At the time, Pizzagate was believed by, if you believe in these polls, millions and millions of Americans, and the vast majority of them, even those living near the pizzeria and whatnot, who could have done something about it, did nothing, or if they did something, they left a one-star review on the pizzeria. I'm just going to read one of them because I found that quite hilarious and revealing. So this guy leaves a 1-star review, writing, "The pizza was incredibly undercooked." Sorry, that's the most important bit. Suspicious, professionally dressed men by the bar area that looked like regulars kept staring at my son and other kids in the place. Definitely not coming back, beginning to think the conspiracies about this place are true. So this is a good representative of the vast majority of the reactions to Pizzagate. And it is insane. I mean, think of, you think that possibly children are being abused in a restaurant, and you go there with your kid, and then you start the review by noting that the pizza is undercooked. I mean, it's just, so there's no plausible, link between what we would have an intuitive belief. Imagine if you had seen the children again being abused, and this kind of behavior. It's completely uncorrelated. Unfortunately, this type of behavior is true for the vast majority of people who believe in conspiracy theories. Another good contrast is the contrast between conspiracy theorists and whistleblowers or would-be whistleblowers. So conspiracy theorists, if they do anything about the conspiracy, is they talk about it. They're going to have placards and demonstrations. If they're very successful, they'll have YouTube channels and talk show hosts and whatnot. And they're very loud and vocal about it. And by contrast, if you're in a company or the government and you suspect that there is an actual conspiracy going on, then you're afraid and you shut up. And it takes tremendous effort from authorities to get you to say anything and to speak up. And so the contrast between the behaviors of these people who, what we would call kind of reflectively, in this kind of very abstract manner, believe in conspiracy theories, and the behavior of people who intuitively know that their boss is hiding something is very striking. So still, I mean, the fact that, even if these conspiratorial beliefs tend to be what we would call reflective, so, detached from most of our behavior, except for our expressive behavior and from our other thoughts, they still problematic in some cases, and they still warrant some explanation. And I think that for lay people, and to some extent for more serious commenters sometimes, the first explanation that comes to mind is gullibility. These people are just a bit stupid. They will accept anything that they come across. And I think this is just widely mistaken for several reasons. One is that we know that every typically functioning human is very well equipped with cognitive mechanisms to evaluate what people tell them, to decide who to trust, and to decide what to believe. We know that toddlers, even kind of infants are going to be able to do that to some extent. Everywhere in the world, people do that extremely well. We also know that outside of their conspiratorial beliefs, most conspiracy theorists are able to function in society decently well. Most of them have jobs, families, which requires them to be able to evaluate information in a way that is broadly appropriate. And indeed, if anything, it is too hard rather than too easy to convince conspiracy theorists. I mean, all of them have been exposed to reliable information that they have rejected. So if anything, the problem is not gullibility, but too much conservatism and too much kind of bigottedness, if you will. So given that I don't think we can just rely on this kind of just sheer gullibility to explain why people believe in conspiracy theories and why these theories can be so culturally successful, in the sense that they become widely spread, I think the best thing to do is to try to look at what conspiracy theorists actually do. So one of the things that they do, the ones who are really into it, is they do their own research, as they proudly call it. And to some extent, it's true. I mean, they do spend a lot of time online. They read a lot. In many cases, they are way better informed than the general, the typical member of the public. Like the typical, anti-vax person knows more about vaccination than most pro-vax people. The same is true for 9/11 and all this. And I think we can relate as researchers or journalists or kind of intellectuals that this is just a great activity. Just doing research is fun. It's interesting. It's intellectually challenging, and I can, to some extent, I empathize with that desire. I mean, even if, obviously the conclusions are not, the ones that we would like them to reach, I can empathize with the desire to want to engage in that process. And, also with the fact that it's hard to engage in that process if you don't have the right credentials, and there's a lot of barriers to engaging in that process in the right way that are hard to overcome. But so besides, and doing their own research, the main thing that conspiracy theorists do is they talk about their beliefs and they share them, on social media, in person, in various formats. And so why do they do this? And the question is all the more acute that we've shown with some colleagues, something that's relatively should be obvious, we hope, that it can be quite costly reputationally to endorse such false beliefs. So, for instance, we had an experiment in which people who would share fake news or institutions that would share fake news would see the trust in them drop dramatically. And we've also shown that most people would need to be paid a lot to agree to share fake news from their social media accounts. Like, people are very wary of the potential reputational fallout of sharing fake news or conspiracy theories. But on the other side, there might also be reputational benefits to sharing conspiracy theories. One is that they can be used to signal group membership. So if you believe in Pizzagate, for instance, you are vastly more likely to be a Republican. And there are some people who have suggested that the very kind of absurdity and extremity of these beliefs is one of the things that make them efficient as signals of group membership. Like, someone who is just somewhat center right would not dare to jeopardize their reputation that way. Whereas if you're just kind of all the way, then you can say absurdities because you won't be held to account by people of your camp, which are the only ones that matter to you. Another thing that you want to signal, and that several of us have touched on earlier, is mistrust towards the authorities. So, for instance, that's something you could have seen maybe among African Americans in the US when they were sharing stories of the CIA giving them AIDS and this sort of things. And it's partly a way of figuring out whether these people, the people you're talking to, are on your side and against the authorities. In that case, kind of justifiably enough. In some contexts, sharing particularly offensive conspiracy theories can also be used to signal dominance. So just to show, look, that's something you could have seen to some extent in people like Trump, that you can get away with it. Like, you can share these things that are really offensive, and you won't be held into account, and that shows that you're the boss. And finally, one of the, I think, maybe most important social functions of conspiracy theories, and that Elise mentioned earlier, and also in our discussion with Stephan, is to justify your behavior. So you want to do something anyway, and conspiracy theories are just super handy to justify all sorts of atrocities. And in many cases, we can get some kind of indirect evidence that the conspiracy theories mostly play a justificatory and not a kind of direct causal role by looking at the mismatch between the conspiracy theory itself and the behavior. So if you take the pogroms that Elise was describing, if in a group, in a typical UN group, someone does some kind of atrocious crime, the typical reaction will be to try to kill that person or ostracize them if it's too costly to try to kill them. By contrast, in the typical pogrom, Jews would be killed indiscriminately. Like, I have friends with the example of the pogrom in Kishinev in mind. Like, they would rape the women, they would pillage the wine store. Like, none of that has any relationship with the actual specific crime that the Jewish people are being accused of. Instead, it's being used as a blanket cover to engage in these horrible behaviors. So that doesn't mean that it doesn't do anything, but it's not as if you take someone who doesn't want to do anything bad to Jewish people and they hear the rumor and all of a sudden they want to murder them. I mean, it's really not what happens. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugo. Elise, I could see you have a question for Hugo there, I think.
Sorry, you're muted still.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. Just about the pogroms, I wanted to add, certainly the violence escalated beyond the individual who was held responsible for the murder, and it was about anti-Semitism and not about the particular conspiracy theory. But in sort of the cases that I have looked at, part of the point of the conspiracy theory is not to necessarily galvanize people to action who would not have taken action to begin with, but to make sure that other people don't intervene. and that you get sort of a general community consensus that this is going to be the story that we rally around. And so you shouldn't get in the way of that if you want to be part of that community.
Yes, no, completely. And it's also to some extent a way of testing the waters, like of seeing what other people, whether they're on your side or not, and in particular the authorities. Like if the authorities start saying, no, this is bullshit, you can't say that, then they're going to intervene if you start doing something about it. But if the authorities don't act when the rumors start circulating and being kind of publicly held, then you can be pretty much guaranteed that you can do whatever you want.
And I also just, sorry, quickly to push back a little bit against the assumption that sincere, intuitive belief in atrocities going on will necessarily lead to action. I mean, around the time of Pizzagate, children were being essentially held and tortured in government camps at the border. At the same time, I knew this to be true. You knew this to be true, and we intuitively knew it to speak to that because we all heard the recording of it going on. And so we felt it, but I didn't storm the gates and no one did. And so I'm not sure that is necessarily an assumption we can make, that if you believe in an atrocity taking place, that you will take action, as much as I would like to think that we would.
No, that's fair enough. I mean, if you really live nearby, but yeah, no, fair enough. I can see how there are other reasons for not taking action besides not intuitively believing in the thing. But clearly, you're not going to leave a 1-star review of the place they're being held on.
No, but I might talk about it on Facebook, which is equally ineffective.
Well, not necessarily.
May I ask, first of all, thank you, all of you, for a really stimulating discussion. And there are questions that are coming through from our participants, and I'm also aware that we're running short of time. So I want to give voice to at least one of those questions that come through from Jeff, who is asking about the enablers, such as politicians, he says, who may know that a conspiracy theory is false or not believe it themselves, but continue to spread it because the theory seems to benefit them. And he suggests that the enablers might be the most important group because they kind of amplify or seem to legitimize that conspiracy theory. So I want to put that there to you, but also add a little bit as well in that has this always been the case that politicians have been able to exploit these kinds of theories to the degree to which maybe they do now? Or would it have been the case in the past that without the wider discourse, those politicians would have been more worried about being held to account? And is there a degradation in the truth and accounting for the truth in today's world that perhaps we haven't seen in quite the same way before? Or is this always been the situation, do you think? And maybe I can just ask each of you who wants to address that. We have only a couple of minutes left. So, Stephan.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I think, yes, there has been a shift in the type of misinformation that politicians get away with, the quantity as well as the quality. And I think it's important to understand why that is. One of the hypotheses that I prefer is that politicians who lie, and lie all the time, can use that as a signal of their authentic opposition to the establishment. So let's take Donald Trump. I mean, he lies all the time, 20 times a day, 30,000 times during his presidency. And yet Republicans, by a 3-to-1 margin, consider him to be honest and to be telling the truth. How can that be? Well, I think what these politicians do is to replace honesty with authenticity, and they can signal their allegiance to the real people against the elites by violating establishment norms, and honesty is an establishment norms. So is education. So are the mainstream media. So is all sorts of things that Trump is systematically violating. You know, he's against education, against science. He's disparaging experts. The same in the United Kingdom. And within a populist logic, this binary logic between the people and the elites, anything you do to violate an establishment norm gives you political credit. And so that's why I think these people now appear on the scene, and they're all the same, you know, Johnson, Trump, Bolsonaro, in Brazil, you know, all these populist politicians are playing by the same playbook.
Okay, thank you. We are pretty much out of time, but please, Elise, Simina, Hugo, do any of you want to address this issue? The last few minutes. Okay.
Elise, do you want to take the long historical view on the? I'm sure. I mean, as you were saying, you know, the King of England taking advantage of this to kick the Jews out and expropriate them might have been a very early example of but and obviously, you know, the people, you know, you mentioned earlier that the Dreyfus affair, which was also used by politicians. So there might be an uptick now, but it's unfortunately not a new phenomenon. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Yeah, I think it correlates with rise in authoritarianism and generally strongmen and a shift towards the right, which we're going through now, and but that obviously happens many times throughout history. So it's not a unique moment, but within our lifetimes, it might be sort of a more unusual moment.
Well, my personal reflection on that would be, as you all say, not that any of this is new, but that one of the things we can maybe perceive from that long historical view is the correlation between the rise of conspiracy theories and the spread of them, and periods of heightened anxiety, social anxiety, where these conspiracy myths perhaps give some comfort to people in the sense of oversimplifying a very concerning, worrying, and dangerous time, whether that was in other pandemics like the Black Death or today, or times of revolution, or times of mass unemployment. Often seem to see the rise of these kinds of phenomena around these times. Thank you all so much for giving us your time, and thank you everyone who's joined us for this session and for the previous sessions as well. For me, it's been a real privilege to be part of the 3 sessions. They're available online, so if you missed the early ones, please do go back and take a look. I've learned a huge amount from the panelists today and on the previous sessions. And thank you to the European House of History for hosting these on such important questions right now. As I said, you today have stimulated a lot of conversation in terms of the comments that are coming in. I'm sorry we don't have time to address them all, but I do know one of them was looking for recommended reading on the role of social media in the propagation of conspiracy theories, such as QAnon. So I wonder, although we haven't got time to address that live, maybe that's the sort of thing which can go into the notes that our colleagues at the European House of History can do. And I invite any and all of the speakers who want to contribute any little references or other points like that. I'm sure we could add those to the video. Again, thank you all so much. Really appreciate your time and your expertise.